it's Ann Taylor-Pittman with Cooking Light. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I have a really fun recipe to share because you know what? We're into the holiday baking season. So I have a wonderful cookie recipe that you'll be proud to set out for Santa on Christmas Eve. I'm making chocolate peppermint thumbprints with a secret ingredient in the filling that makes them a little healthier, or maybe a lot healthier, and a whole lot more delicious. So let me get started making the cookies. First off, I want to mix together my dry ingredients. I have 2 cups of whole wheat pastry flour. This is an ingredient I love for baking. This cookie story, which appeared in our December issue, I developed recipes. I use whole wheat pastry flour for every cookie recipe. It works wonderfully. It's a little finer than whole wheat flour, just regular whole wheat flour or white whole wheat flour. It works so great for cookies. And I love it because it's whole grain, but also because it tastes really good. It gives every cookie a little bit of a kind of nutty, wonderful flavor. And if you're making chocolate cookies, it sort of amplifies the chocolatey flavor. So I'm adding a half a cup of unsweetened cocoa and a half a teaspoon of kosher salt to the flour. That's my dry mixture. Let me just whisk it together to combine. Okay, and I use kosher salt, honestly, because that's what I use at home. That's almost exclusively what I use. It works well in these baked goods because it gives like little kind of discernible pockets of salty goodness in a really nice way. Okay, so then for my wet ingredients, I have some butter in the mixer bowl here. It's half a cup of butter or 1 stick of butter, unsalted butter, because we added some salt there to the dry ingredients. If all you have on hand is salted butter, just reduce the amount of added salt to 1/4 teaspoon. Just cut it in half and you'll be fine. Okay, now to that I'm adding 2/3 cup of granulated sugar, a tablespoon of canola oil. The oil will just kind of help the dough come together, and then a teaspoon of vanilla extract. And let me get that going here in the mixer. Just gonna blend that up till it's well combined. I'll probably stop and scrape down the bowl here in just a second. Let me stop and scrape down just so everything gets really well mixed together. These cookies are super easy. They took me no time. I made a batch ahead and it took me no time at all to prep them out. Ah, lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, and then to that I'm gonna add 1 large egg. Blend that up. Stop and scrape the bowl, just again, so everything gets really well combined.
And we have a question.
Great.
Do you need your egg to be at room temperature?
Oh, that's a great question. Whenever possible, if you can have your eggs at room temperature, it's going to perform a little better in baking. I always forget to take my egg out ahead of time, so you can put it in a bowl of warm water for just a few minutes to kind of bring it back to room temperature. I also always keep my whole wheat flour, my whole wheat pastry flour in the freezer. And if I put the flour in ice cold, it's going to affect the baking time and actually the performance of the cookie. So if you keep your flour in the freezer, just take it out and let it warm up to room temperature. That was a great question. Okay, so I'm gonna add the dry ingredients to the wet to make my cookie dough. Go on low speed so everything doesn't fly up. And you just wanna mix until everything sort of comes together. I'm starting at low speed. I might just crank it up 1 more notch when I feel like there's no danger of dry ingredients flying out. Just to kind of bring everything together. There we go. Everything's nice and combined. There it is, a pretty firm dough. If there are any little pockets of flour left, I'm just going to get it here with the spatula. I don't want to over mix the dough. It might make the cookies tough. But you'll see it's a pretty firm, slightly crumbly dough, but it comes together really nicely as you work with it. So I have a 1 tablespoon cookie scoop. Perfect thing for making cookies. And this makes 36 cookies. So if the dough kind of crumbles, just sort of smush it together. The temperature of your hands will warm up that butter and loosen everything up. So I'm not going to make the full batch, but I am going to get about maybe 15 or so. Maybe I'll get half the recipe out here. So I'm just going to make some cookies. Now I would love to hear about your holiday cookie traditions. If you have any, I'll share mine. I probably shouldn't share this. If you're going to judge me, so be it. But we always put out cookies and bourbon for Santa because we think that Santa sometimes needs a nice little nightcap for a break from the usual. So that's what my kids have grown up with. They'll appreciate that one day, I think. Okay, so you see it sort of started to crumble. So I'm just kind of bringing it together in my hands, letting my hand sort of warm the batter. But these are really wonderful. So Thumbprint cookies, we're just going to make these little dough balls and then of course make the indentation in them, which is where the filling goes. Okay, so maybe I'll make about 12 so that you don't have to watch me do it all. I'll end up baking this whole batch so that people here in the test kitchen and the crew can enjoy these cookies because they really are pretty great, if I do say so myself. Okay, so 1 tablespoon per cookie. So I'm going to do 12 here on the pan. Again, the recipe makes 32 cookies. No, 36. Is that right? 36, not 32. So if I were going to do half a batch, I would do half a batch on each baking sheet and get 18 cookies on here if I were doing the full recipe.
Hey,
okay.
Ann, we have a quick question for
Great.
you. So Sarah wants to know if you can use that kind of flour for all cookie recipes.
Yes. Thank you for your question. I have used that type of flour in place of all-purpose flour in several cookie recipes that call for all-purpose flour. I have never had a problem with it. I think it works really well. You can swap it out 1 for 1 so that you can feel good about having a whole wheat, whole grain cookie. I think it's great stuff. I get mine, this is not product placement or whatever, I get mine at Whole Foods, their store brand, the 365 Everyday brand, and it's great. So I'm just making my thumbprint in here. If the cookie starts to kind of come apart, you can just sort of push it back together, make a nice little nest. You can also use the handle of a wooden spoon. I just kind of flatten the cookie out a little bit and use the handle. Either way, since it's called a thumbprint, I like to actually use my thumb. So these are going to bake for 10 minutes at 350 degrees. And after that time, let me get these in the oven, turn on a timer, and I'll show you what they look like. Okay, so after they have baked for 10 minutes, they look like this. Super cute little nests, just ready for the filling. So I mentioned that there's a secret ingredient in the filling. So I'm making a lighter ganache. So ganache is typically made with melted chocolate and heavy cream. Has a wonderful, silky, soft, creamy consistency, but the heavy cream is pretty heavy in saturated fat. So instead, I'm using some melted chocolate and tahini. So this is a tahini ganache, which is really lovely. It works beautifully, the tahini does. So I'm just going to mix it in. It's 2/3 of chocolate chips that I have melted, and then to that I'm adding 1/3 cup. Did I say 2/3? 2/3 cup of chocolate chips melted along with 1/3 cup of tahini. I'm just whisking that together and that becomes the ganache. So it's going to be loose like this when you first make it and when you fill the cookies, but you can leave them out. They'll firm up at room temperature in about an hour, or you can speed the process up by popping the tray into the refrigerator for about 20 minutes. Okay, so let me fill these guys. You need just like a teaspoon or maybe even a little less per cookie. This has such great flavor because, you know, it's melted chocolate And then the tahini has a pretty mild flavor, so it doesn't come across as like a chocolate and nut butter thing. It just comes across as chocolate. You could definitely use, if you don't have tahini on hand, you could use a nut butter. Just know that, you know, the nut butter will assert itself a little bit in the flavor. Cashew butter has a pretty mild flavor, so you could use that without getting that nut butter flavor. But again, that's just to add some healthy, heart-healthy fats here in place of the saturated fat that heavy cream would add. It's going to keep the consistency nice and creamy, just like a traditional ganache. So this is almost the last step. You notice these are called chocolate-peppermint thumbprints, so the peppermint part is coming up. It's really fun. This is something you could get your kids to help you with. They could help fill these thumbprint cookies. They can make the little thumbprint indentations. That would be a fun job for the kids. And then they can help crush the peppermints, which I will demo here in just a second.
And we have a question.
Okay, great.
Mary wants to know, for the cookie batter itself, she wants to know if you could use applesauce in place of the oil.
You know what? It's only 1 tablespoon of oil. I have not tried it with applesauce, but I'm afraid the applesauce would make the cookies a little too dry and perhaps the final baked cookie a little cakey and maybe not as much as you like. So not exactly the texture that you want. So I haven't tried it, but if you want to try, you may need to use a little bit more applesauce, maybe more than 1 tablespoon, which is the amount of oil that we use, just to get the right consistency in the dough. Thank you for your question. Okay, so here's the fun part. You take out all your aggressions here on your peppermints. So the recipe calls for 6 of the round peppermint candies, but look, we have candy canes today. So I have some already crushed up in here, and then I'm just gonna crush up the rest. I'm gonna place a towel over and just bang it with a heavy pan. I'm actually gonna uncover so I can see what I'm doing. Kids love helping with this part. Nice small pieces so that you can then sprinkle it over while the ganache is still soft, so that they'll get kind of sort of, they'll stick, the little peppermint pieces will stick to the ganache while it's still soft. And you know, we were saying earlier when I prepped out a batch of these cookies. They're super cute with just the ganache in there, but boy, when you add the peppermint, then it feels like Christmas. Okay, so like I said, you can let these set at room temperature for about an hour and the filling will firm up, or place that in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes to speed things up. And here are some of the finished cookies. Chocolate peppermint thumbprints, so cute, so festive, incredibly easy to make. Once the filling is firmed up, you can stack these. They're not super delicate and they're really delicious. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you got some fun ideas for how you can make your holidays a little more festive. Please like and share this video if you're watching on Facebook, and if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe so you'll get notifications when we go live. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week with more holiday cookies.